We're in the 8th chapter of Yoma, the chapter that describes the Yom Kippur pretty much as we know it. And we began with the description of the various afflictions, the various restrictions that the Torah puts in place: eating, drinking, sex, anointing, wearing leather shoes. There's probably one more. And we learned that the one that the Mishnah seems to be most interested in is actually eating and drinking. And we also learned that there's something about eating and drinking which means that if we carry it on for too long, we die. That's essentially the reasoning that we learned in the Gemara yesterday. Eating and refraining from eating and drinking somehow brings us closer to death. And we'll see today as we go through the 8th chapter that these questions of life and death are very much alive in the remainder of the Mishnah. So we begin with children. Hatinokot ein ma'anin otan b'yom HaKippurim. We don't afflict children. We don't make children fast on Yom Kippur. Aval, but mechanchen otam lifnei shana ve'lifnei shnatayim b'shvil sheyehu regilin b'mitzvot. But we sort of get them used to this idea 1 or 2 years before their bar mitzvah, so they become accustomed to the commandments. So children are not obligated. What about other exceptions? So ubara shehericha. What about a pregnant woman who smells something? And the context here clearly is smelling food. And of course, any of us who've been pregnant or been around a pregnant woman knows that smelling becomes enormously important. There are extraordinary either desires or repulsions from the sense of smell during pregnancy. And the Mishnah seems to be responding at this point to the psychological needs of the pregnant woman rather than her physical needs, because it just says, Machilin ota ad shetashiv nasha. We feed her until her spirit returns. There's no suggestion she's ill. But if someone is ill, if someone is sick, then we feed them on the word of experts. If there are no experts available, then we feed him according to his own word. Ad shiomar, die, until he says, that's enough. Now, what is this stuff that the pregnant woman has smelt? And the Rambam brings an idea that I couldn't find in the Gemara, but it was taught to me when I originally learned the Mishnah. The Rambam says, "V'chein ubara shehericha basar kodesh or basar chazir." This is not just ordinary kind of food that a woman is smelling on Yom Kippur. This is holy food. This is the basically. This is she's smelling the sacrifices, the roast sacrifices. She's smelling food that only a Kohen is allowed to eat. Or maybe she's smelling forbidden food, basar chazir, pig's meat. So she's feeding, she's smelling stuff that is absolutely forbidden. And the Rambam explains, Venit orer tiv'ah, her sort of nature is aroused, Vetit aver lechol, and she really wants to eat. And then the Rambam continues, Ma'achilin ota mimenu ad she'yit yashev nafsha. We feed her from the forbidden food until her spirit returns. And in the Gemara, by the way, there's a suggestion that we hold off for a little bit. We whisper into her ear, oh, it's Yom Kippur today. And maybe at that point, that will be sufficient to calm her down. But the Gemara agrees, by the way, if that's not sufficient to calm her down, we feed her. And the Mishnah is teaching us really that sickness, even if it's psychological sickness, takes precedence over many other things. And the Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud here comments with respect to the sick person. If the sick person says, Chole omer yachol ani, ve'rofeh omer eino yachol, shomim larofeh. If the person says, I can manage on Yom Kippur, but the physician says he can't, we listen to the physician. If the physician says he can, but the sick person says he cannot, we listen to the sick person. So why do we need this Mishnah? So lo tzorcha, we don't need this teaching. Ela chole omer yachol ani ve'rofeh omer eini yoder. We only need this Mishnah if the sick person says I can, and the physician says I don't know what to do. And then Rabbi Abahu v'shem Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Abahu says in the name Rabbi Yochanan, na'aseh kisfeik nefashot. It's like an uncertainty of danger to life. V'chol sfeik nefashot doche et ha-Shabbat. Any danger to life, even if it's a possible danger to life, pushes the Shabbat aside, and therefore it pushes Yom Kippur aside as well. So along the same lines, Misha achazor vulmus, someone who sees by a bulmus. We don't really know what a bulmus is, but it seems to be a Greek word, and the root, it reminds us of the word bulimia. It's clearly some eating disorder, and it's some eating disorder that makes him want to eat and eat a lot very fast. Somehow it makes him absolutely ravenous. That's the sense of it. Misha achazor bulmus, someone seized by a bulmus, ma'achilin oto afilu dvarim tmeim ad sheyoru einav. We feed him even unclean things until his eyes light up. Mish neshacho kelev shoteh. Someone is bitten by a mad dog. By the way, at this point, we have drifted away, haven't we, from Yom Kippur, the question of being bitten by a mad dog, or perhaps even being seized by a bulmus. These are things that can happen outside Yom Kippur. So the Mishnah here seems to be talking general halacha about saving life, rather than halacha specific to Yom Kippur. Mishnah shachor kelev shoteh, someone was bitten by a bad dog. Ein machalin oto mechatzer shelo. We don't feed him the lobe of its liver. And that seems to be because the rabbis don't believe it's effective. So if it were effective, clearly we'd feed it to him. But if the rabbis don't think it's effective, then they won't permit it. And there's another opinion. Rabbi Matya ben Charash matir. Rabbi Matya ben Charash permits it. Clearly he has a different medical view. Ve'odama Rabbi Matya ben Charash, and Rabbi Matya ben Charash taught another teaching, hachoshesh bigrono, someone who's worried about his throat, someone who's got a pain in his throat. This is a sore throat. And nowadays we think about a sore throat as not very dangerous, but then we have antibiotics. You can imagine in a time of the Mishnah, without any infection control, without any antibiotics, a sore throat could lead to something very, very dangerous. And that seems to be what Rabbi Matya ben Charash is saying. We can drop medicine into his mouth on Shabbat because it's a danger to life. It may be a danger to life. Any possible danger to life pushes away Shabbat. And again, we can see here that we've now moved away from discussion of Yom Kippur to discussion of how we save life on Shabbat. And indeed, we've learned the whole Masechet of Shabbat. These halachot to do with danger to life or possibility of death are not taught there. They're not taught in the Mishnah of Shabbat at all. They are taught here in the Mishnah of Yom Kippur, as if when the rabbis are teaching the halacha of Yom Kippur, somehow in the back of their minds, they have in the back of their minds something to do with life and death.